Ayin Beis, we're up to chapter 65, which is on page 121. Kuf Chaf Aleph, middle of the second chapter of Discourse 17, Atem Netzovim. Just to sum up where we're at. So, middle of discussion of, we'll call it transcendence. Makif. Makif, or otherwise known as Shevav Kalalman. This is the transcendent energy as opposed to the immanent energy, which on one hand does not permeate and is not internalized, basically meaning on the terms of the recipient. That's the key thing to know with Shevav. Like he says in Tanya, it's within existence, it's here. But it's not on our terms. So if you want to have an example of Shevav in a person's life, would be a presence of something, but you can't identify with it or you can't relate to it. So in a very practical way, even when you say a neshama leaves this earth, meaning he leaves his body, the neshamas are here, but we'd call them makif. They're not primis. When the neshama is inside of a body, you'd call it primis because the body sees it and others can see it. Like the Rabbi once wrote to somebody who suffered a loss and said, you have to remember, they see you, you don't see them. That means they're here. Neshamas don't go to outer space. They're here, but they're here what's called makif. Makifim. When something is a pnimi, means it's sensed in some way on our terms. So if a teacher is communicating an idea and the student receives it and is able to internalize it, that's a pnimi dekam shacha. If the teacher is saying something that does not enter the student or remains hovering, that's a makif dika thing. Obviously there are many levels in makifim. Here he's talking on a godly level. When you say godliness exists in this world, we're not talking about atzmas now, because atzmas doesn't have space and time. The whole thing is like beyond, doesn't need to be present, beyond, not nitfas. But in Seva Mala, if you see the beauty of the world, you could say that's God's presence. A person can still have free will and say it's nature, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that anything that doesn't make sense you call nature. It's natural. What does that mean? It's natural. But nevertheless, there is an obvious order. If a person thinks a little about their life and they see that they're able to breathe without effort, thank God. They're able to walk, they're able to talk, they're able to do certain things. So a Jew knows that you say, Maidani lefanecha, you acknowledge, you make the brachas in the morning, etc. Because you acknowledge, but you're something you can talk, you can point to. Because you see godliness within your life. You see the godly energy that's sustaining. When you say makif, you're talking about something that is not obvious. Can it be deduced? Yeah. So he's been talking here about that level of energy, but it also has an impact on our lives. And the impact that he discussed was, first, we call makif kloli of ak, which is basically God's desire that He wants the universe. And we're talking about desire here, not the particular instruments, the spheres used to create fire or water or a plant or a human being. That's already mamal kalam. So what's its impact? Its impact in general, he says, is a general bittul in the entire existence, and we feel it only as far as we are able to receive life, the life force. The fact that we're able to be alive is itself a sign of some type of impact of that level. It's one thing. And then it comes to neshamas, he said that the impact is amunah pshuta. The simple faith of a person, the nishmuna pshuta, or ava mushateres, the concealed love, the mesiras nefesh that a Jew is ready to go, that's coming from that power of makif. So something seeps into existence. Let's put it this way: if there was no ak effect on us, then we would be able to relate again to Mamala Kalam, to God's presence in nature, in our daily lives, but not to some type of like going out of a mesiras nefesh or kiddush Hashem or anything like that. Another way of putting it is nasiv nishma, that which we say we'll do and then we'll understand and then we'll hear, which is a bittul to the bala rotzon. That's all from ak. The impact of Tehiri law, which is the makif kloli before the tzimtzum, is even deeper level. Is the ability for a person like the Akedah, the ability to give of our bodies. Here there's nothing revealed at all. A body, giving yourself of your body. So when a person understands and says, okay, I want to give my neshama, but a body, which is the Akedah or a fast day or Yom Kippur, That level, that comes from Tirilo. Then the Rebbe Rasha moved over to now the Makifim Pratim, that in addition to the general desire for the structure of existence, Hashem also has a desire for each particular world. Hatzilas, B'riya, Yitzira. And now that's what he began discussing, that in addition to the general, you need to have specifics. Because in the general picture, in the general desire, you don't have two things are missing. There's no distinct entities. So if you talk about an interface between us and God, between the material world and the divine, that interface, as far as the makiv goes, is a very all-inclusive one. Like Amunah, everyone's equal when it comes to faith. There's no such thing as levels. One person has more Amunah pshuta than another. One person may act on it more. One person may be more revealed. But essentially, everyone has it equally. But then we have a structure called the structure of existence. And here there are distinctions. So just to have the general desire that I want to have a dira b'tachtenim is not sufficient to create a structure like our existence. I gave an example yesterday, which may be very helpful when we talked about the structure, that when you have a corporate hierarchy, you have a general head, and then you have department heads. If you only had a general head, the departments wouldn't work properly. Each department needs its rotzon, its keser. And then all those ksarim have a keser klali, so to speak. So that way it works. So he's discussing why the keser klali, the general rotzon, is not enough. So one is because you don't have distinct entities, a chachma, bina, chesed, gvura, tzilas, bria, and so on. And secondly, is because the energy is all there equal. In the rotzon, everything was equalized by the intensity of the rotzon of the person's desire, or God's desire. So in last chapter, he's added now, he's going deeper. He's saying, Oid Yuvan, to understand, last chapter 64, what we learned yesterday, is that to further understand, better understand this rotzon prati, so he goes into a discussion of two types of desire, two levels of desire, two levels of rotzon. And this chapter 64, he discussed the first level, and now we're going to learn the second. So to sum up the first, is that there's an actual rotzon. The way he defines rotzon is exactly these words. So it's a very good to underline this line, because he says, defines rotzon like this. Hainu k'sheyechpetz be'ezeh dover, that someone desires something, acha timshach nafshei elav, mamish, till his spirit is drawn to it, v'yita l'dover, and he has an inclination to it, l'dover ahu, l'dabak elav u'lasigei, to bond with it, to cleave to it, and to acquire it. So that's it. You see here a whole process of what means desire. Someone wants something. So, we don't think about it much. You want something, you reach out and you get it. Or you said, no, this is not appropriate, so I won't touch it. But a desire, if you dissect it step by step by step, something is, like he says, there's an awakening inside that you desire something. You're then drawn to it. You then are inclined to reach to it, you connect it, and you acquire it. That's a desire, no matter what it is, whether it's a desire for wisdom, or for an object, or whatever it may be. So that's the inyan of rotzon, hatiyev hamshachal eze davar. Now, the key thing that he explains in this past chapter, 64, was in a big long parentheses, that there's really three levels of this desire, or three types. One is, we'll call it a desire that has no kavon at all, has no objective, has no intention, has no destination. It's simply an extension of the etzem of a person. The example he gives, the love of a parent to a child, and a child to a parent. Sometimes that love is very open, and you feel the yearning, and you feel the missing and longing for somebody, for the child, or the child for the parent. But even if you don't feel it, it's there. It's always there. And when you spend time with your child, you do something with that child, it's not because you have some type of goal. You could have a goal, but it's driven because you love your child. So therefore, let's go do something together. Like, let's say if you have a business partner, you do something because there's a goal. The goal is to build a better relationship, to trust each other, to manipulate him, whatever it may be. With a child, I'm talking about a healthy relationship. The love is there. It's always there. Again. And he says that's an example for God's love to Neshamas Yisrael. No matter what happens, it's a beautiful, powerful piece here. He brings all the Mamor Chazal. That Bani Atem, This is the example. What does he say? The Lashon he says. That one, and then he says even more, where he says, no matter what, you're my children. They're my children. And is it possible, God forbid, that a parent is going to say, my child is so bad, I want to change my child for another child? God forbid. That doesn't mean, I'm talking about even in the worst circumstance. So there's atzmi. So this is an example of a rotzon he's not discussing here, actually. This is a rotzon like he calls it, bli tam or bli kavon. Then comes the one he is talking about here, is one that has bli tam, but it has a kavon. What means bli tam? It's not driven by a reason. For example, God wants to create the world. So he says, Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu, God desired to have a home in this world. That he calls bli tam, but there's a kavon. The kavon is did b'tachtein. And then there's a rotzon with a tam. A rotzon with a tam is literally when you're walking down the street, you're hungry, you go into the store and you buy something. That b'chal has a reason and a kavon, and it's very. So here he's talking about the first desire in existence is God's desire for the world, and he says clearly he's not talking about the connection, the rotzon atzmi that's connected to neshamas. So neshamas is just, you could almost say the connection to neshamas the rotzon is a product of the essential connection. Where the rotzon to create the world is a product of the intention that you have. God doesn't have an essential connection to the world. He has an essential connection to what he desires in the world, which is he wants a dira b'tachtein. So the kavanah is not in the world, the kavanah is transforming a dark place to godliness. Whereas neshama is an extension of godliness itself.
But the other
basically
to create the neshamas.
Here it's mashma that the neshamas are an extension of his etzem. The rotzon is that the neshama should manifest in some type of form or shape. Right. Yeah. No. But I'm saying, but they reflect the essence of the Father, as opposed to an intention. That's what he says here. In other words, if God, look, let's make it clear: a neshama is not God. But if God wants to express himself, a neshama is his natural expression. A world is not. A tree is not an extension of God. A tree has a kavanah. I want this tree in order to do something with it. So let's make it clear. We understand everything comes from godliness and everything is rooted in that. And the question is how much of the etzem is reflected in this element. The key thing to remember also that oyer is not like a neshama either. He doesn't say that. You see, oyer doesn't have, neshama, it says in some places in Chassidus, elakus shana sheyesh. Oyer has only the quality that it doesn't have anything but godliness. But it's not of substance. You can't say God desired oyer. Doesn't make any sense. Oyer is God's desire. Whatever he wants. Oyer is like the agent that carries it. A neshama is an entity, but it's an entity like a child coming out of the essence. Now, obviously, when you really want to analyze it, it's clear that the atzmus, in a way, you can't say atzmus needed neshamas. It's not like that. It's in some way the etzem. A part when we say chelik alekama mal mamish, the etzem in his own infinite power is able to give you a piece of himself, whereas the trees and the tables and the stones in this world are not a piece of godliness. That doesn't mean they're not the etzem. They're alakus. Everything about them they're not outside of godliness. But you can't say they are an expression of godliness. You could say they're expression of godliness, but you can't say they're expression of God. That's what you would say. I mean, I can explain it. You can explain it. The example usually the Rabbi uses is like when you want a home. Okay, let's go back to a home. I mean, it's an example, not exactly, because the home itself is also, as he's saying here. But you want a home. You want the bricks? You want the wood? You even want the rooms? Or you want the environment that the rooms create for you and your family to have a comfortable place? In this world, the only way to do it is by building rooms. So you want the goal within it. You want the spirit within it. But the only way to do it is it's not like you want the stone is only a means. That's how the Rebbe puts it. The world is a means to godliness, and neshama is an end in itself. Put it in other words. Look, I think that's enough to really explain it right now. So bottom line is, what we have now in the process of, remember, this is the process of how God, the creation process. So in the cosmic order, you have an etzem, then you have kesed. Kesed, as he put in chapter 1, The whole Hemshel begins with this. In chapter 1 he says, I'm just going to read a line from chapter 1 because I think it's very vital to get the connection. So he says like this, what's Keser? First chapter. He actually speaks exactly what he speaks about here. He says that there's a Keser Klali, and then there's a Keser for each level of the world, of the Shtalshlus. So he says like this. This Keser is rotzon HaPashut, the simple desire of God to create the worlds. Before the Tzimtzum, to create existence. And then at each level there's the rotzon for that particular dimension. Then he says like this, I just want to use the Chassidus in a second. He talks about the Igul HaGadol. The exact map, if you want, is right here in chapter 1. So everything he's saying here is just really explaining chapter 1. That's how you see the link. He speaks about the Igul HaGadol and stuff like that. All the Makifim are rooted in the Igul HaGadol, in the big sphere. And then he says like this, Keser is the interface in every level. See, here's the words. Through the awakening of a desire, so to speak, there becomes a connection between the one who desires and the thing that he's awakened to. And he gives the example. Like a person who's initially you're separate from and detached from anything particular. The Ein L'Shaychus Klal then awakens a desire within him and he creates a relationship. So without desire, there's no relationship. And then he goes on, rotzon is lashon merutza, huhui nahatir v'hamshacha. And before that, there was no connection. You were just within yourself. And he says the same thing is Lamaila, above. That before that desire, there was no relationship between God and existence. On the contrary, he was completely within himself, what he calls Helam Ba'atzmei, and he didn't need or require anybody outside of himself. And then he goes on and says, and then, when a desire awakens, that's when he begins to create a relationship with something else. That's basically half of chapter 1. So he's really continuing from there. There he actually says he speaks about that a person can just be content without desiring anything. Then there's the level of actually desiring. So now we move to chapter 65. So stage 1 is that there's a desire. Now he's going to go a step back. What happens before the desire? So we walk through the steps. You desire something, you're drawn to it, you go and acquire it. That's a desire that has a kavanah, but it has no reason. It's not for any particular reason. It's the desire that comes from within. Like this tzitzach. They're drawn. Sorry, no. I correct that. That's not that one. There's a kavanah primis higher than a reason. God desires to have a dira b'tachtenim. The example he did use that I thought was fitting here, but was not so clear from the summary, that this is an example of, let's say, God wanting Gilui Elokus. Why God cries over the Beis Hamikdash destruction. Because there, even though there's a rotzon atzmi in the shamas, but God wants the Giluyim, the revelation. Or we want the revelation. That would be an example, I assume, for the desire he's talking about. Or maybe not exactly, because here we're talking about not just Giluyim, just the desire that he wants Dira B'Tachtenim. Okay. So now he's going a step back. Second. Okay, now he's taking a step back and saying what happens a second before that you become aware that you have a desire. So there's a conscious awareness now of that desire. He's going now a step back. What's the second before that? Really, he's traveling a little into the unconscious. Like what brings a desire on? You follow? That's what we're going to discuss now. So it's going to get a little more subtle and hafshatadik, abstract. Here we go. So, getting a glimpse like behind the closed door. And now the beauty of this is that we're not only learning about that God wants the world, God is now revealing to us through Chassidus and through Kabbalah and through all that He's telling you even what happened a second before, so to speak. Not a second in time, but a stage before within Himself. So it means we have the ability to connect not just with His desire for the world. You understand the power of this, Eliezer?
Yeah.
In other words, not just with transcendence, which is not, we're not even talking about immanent energy. Within transcendence itself, we're going now a step into what is lying behind the door of conscious desire.
Jumping into Atzmos.
Slowly. Ach, yesh eit beginnes rotzon lifnei rotzon zeh. Ach. Now, however, or yet, would be better, yet, there's a desire even before there's desire.
You keep using touching rotzon interchangeably with desire and will. Isn't there a distinction in that, taiva versus rotzon?
I wouldn't use taiva. For taiva, I would say more pleasure than desire. See, what I mean by desire here, I don't mean necessarily pleasure. Desire, you desire something.
Right.
My translation of desire would be, the truth is there's three things. There's rotzon, chayfetz, and tainug. If you really, chayfetz goes usually into rotzon. Chayfetz Hashem. I'm intentionally, deliberately using desire because I think will or wanting is weaker. I don't know if it's I would prefer, in my understanding of rotzon is more desire than it is will.
So then what's
the difference between desire and tainug? Let's talk tainug a moment before nisava. Here he said actually nisava looks like the same thing as rotzon here. Because he says it's the rotzon klali for the worlds. But if you really break it down to two, rotzon and tainug, in Samach Vav, he says the following: tainug is just in contentment. It's you on your own. There's a certain contentment that you have that comes from whatever comes. Either it's an inner contentment without anything, you don't need anything or anyone, or it's an outer contentment, meaning that after you've gotten something, it gave you a contentment. That's tainug, as he defines it. Rotzon is merutza. Rotzon means it's a longing for something. That's the difference. Tainug is a state of being. Rotzon is a verb. It's an action. That's how he explains it, and that's how it's explained in Chassidus. So rotzon requires some type of, we call it action. The will, the desire to create a world. That's why I defined it as such. If you want to really break it down.
What about taiva?
So here, in this practical purposes, right here, Nesava, if you look at the last chapter, he's comparing it to rotzon. He calls it, that's the rotzon for the world. So he's not distinguishing here between. Here he doesn't. Earlier he did. If you remember when he spoke about if rotzon gets nothing back from the faculties, what about the contentment you get? So he says that contentment really goes through pleasure. Because contentment, the word desire is not content. Tainug is more contentment.
I would think normally contentment would be menucha. Tainug would be pleasure. It's more than content. Somebody's content with something, he's got menuchas and nefesh. But tainug shows that he's enjoying something. There's an actual.
No, that's correct. Intuitively, you're right, but that's not how Chassidus interprets tainug. Chassidus interprets tainug the menucha, like menucha. Menucha be'etzem. Yeah, that's why Shabbos, tainug, menucha, it all goes together. It's obviously two different words, tainug and menucha. But the state of tainug
is a beef and yain.
No, but the oneg Shabbos is real oneg Shabbos. No, one second. No.
I could tell with a bottle of water on Shabbos, but I want wine.
But you look at Chassidus, it says oneg hamorgish and oneg bilti morgish. You're talking about how you get there.
Well, what are they doing?
No, that's how you get it. That's not the purpose of the tainug of wine is not because you enjoyed wine. It's because it wants to get the tainug of your nefesh awakened. The truth is, it's just a catalyst. That's what it is. It's not it's to arouse the oneg of Shabbos, which is really an inner contentment, which you may not be able to access without food. That's why L'asad Lavi, it says, "Ein b'achila v'shtiya," you can have the tainug without eating. So we can't today. Yom Kippur we could, for example. Yom Kippur you get that tainug without eating. I mean, the point here is really not, it's a legitimate question. I just want to qualify that there are places where tainug and rotzon are discussed at length. Here, he's speaking, here it's in general terms. He really is not distinguishing. Obviously, all this has a tainug within it, and at nesava. He says clearly nesava. But if you look, he keeps saying 2 levels in rotzon. That's what he's calling this, 2 levels in rotzon. Even the rotzon, where he calls nesava, that God desires, giluyim, that he wants gilui alakus, like Dira B'Tachtenim, he also calls this rotzon here. Let's put it this way. Right here, he's not really discussing the difference between rotzon and tainug. For all practical purposes, you can bunch them as one here. That's why there are places where it's clearly distinguished and discussed. Just for the record, I would put it this way.
You keep saying taiva.
No, nesava is God. Nesava, we also say desiring. If you speak in general terms, you would speak something like this. Everything starts from nesava kadosh baruch hu, that God has a desire. The Alter Rebbe says, a taiva, there's no kasha in a taiva. It's something within his blitam. It says clearly, if a taiva kem nishfregen ken kasha. The main reason for that is because the whole kasha and answers, question, logic, comes after the taiva. So how could you ask a question about the taiva? And the nesava includes that there should be logic. I'm just giving one explanation. The whole idea of asking questions didn't exist when the taiva existed. The taiva was to create a world that asks questions. So you can't answer why there's a taiva. If you break that down, that taiva you can call tainug, you can call rotzon, because it will translate into a desire now that will do something. That rotzon is now going to affect and create levels. First, a level of envisioning in his divine mind or divine infinite light, 10 spheres, then a tzimtzum, and then a kav. Right here he's talking about the process. He's not really talking about how it's rooted in atzmos. He's talking about the process of the rotzon. How does this rotzon evolve? So, for all practical purposes, say there's a nesava. It could probably even higher than tainug. If you ask me about nesava, taiva is even more than tainug. There's a tainug in it, obviously. But rotzon is so-called, let's call rotzon the initial tool that carries the etzem downward. It's not the tool of the 10 spheres. Like we talk about an artist has 2 things working when he's creating a piece of art. His desire for the art and his actual skills. You could have desire and not have skills. Like when we spoke before, you could have skills and no desire. Let's talk in the human being. You could have all talent, but you're very depressed. He spoke about the illness called mania. I asked a few people, by the way. They say that they think that it's manic depressive, but what he called an illness called mania. So someone told me, I asked some people, they said mania there's a certain manic depressive, a certain depression that reflects itself in absolutely no desire, that a person has no will to do anything. There's a certain form of depression like that. Someone who knows someone that had it told me about that. Because earlier I was asking the question, what is this illness mania?
He speaks about that here?
Yeah, chapters ago, yeah.
You mentioned the word.
Yeah, more than the word. He spoke about it several times. It's a big thing, yeah. Mania. Back.
Before Freud or after Freud?
Ayin Beis?
After.
Yeah, but Alter Rebbe uses mania, and Alter Rebbe is before Freud. So.
But mania is not depression. Mania is not depression. It's the opposite.
Well, they say manic depressive usually is the right. The mania is the but here he means mania is a look. Today they call it bipolar. But the bottom line is that there's a mania they call that where a person is depressed. Anyway, he calls it mania here. That's what he calls it. Yeah. Well, you could say the manic part is that is so manically depressed.
He wants everything. He wants to do things.
Now that's that side. You're talking the clinical. But today's interpretation, the interpretation here would be
mania as a short form for manic depression.
Oh, not necessarily. Maybe the mania is inward, that he's so depressed that he just stays in. I don't know what the root of the word manic is. Anyway, a maniac. Anyway, the point is, going back here, so right now, for all practical purposes, the discussion of how this nesava translates into our rotzon. And we're going to use the word rotzon, because when you use tehira la, tehira tata, we call rotzon. Makif keser is rotzon. Remember, keser also has atik, which is tainug. But for all practical purposes, he's talking about arich. The main part of keser here, we're talking about arich, the rotzon, the desire for the world. So I'm using the word desire. To me, it works best, rather than the will. If will works for you, fine. I'm not locked into it. It's an English word. You can say whatever you want, I think desire works.
Generally speaking, don't they say in the level of the highest levels of Kesser, there's oneg and rotzon, not taiva and rotzon. They use the term oneg.
Oneg, tainug and rotzon. That's atik, tainug and rotzon. Yeah.
And of those two levels, of the highest levels, don't they normally say tainug precedes rotzon?
Generally, yes, but in Samach Vav and Ayin Beis as well, there's a discussion which precedes which, because there are proofs either way.
And what's the maskana?
The maskana is that there's two ways to look at it. And generally, the maskana is tainug is usually higher, but it's not. But there are exceptions. Okay. The truth is, the maskana is like this. You know what? You send me an email, I'll send you a link to an article I wrote about it on Samach Vav. Yeah, it's basically just remember like this. Remember, it's interesting. Tainug and rotzon are not two spheres. It's all in Keser. Very important. Like the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid. Chachma and Bina are two spheres. There is a Bina within Chachma and Chachma Bina. But Keser, so if you really want to distinguish rotzon and Tainug, they're part of one entity. I would call it the unconscious force of the soul to get something. So if you break it down, it's Tainug and rotzon. But if you don't, you're really talking about one force that has, if you start dissecting it, it's tainug and rotzon.
Chapter 49 talks about the rotzon very, very much, the whole chapter.
Yeah. Right. So, of course, there's a whole discussion. I sum it up. Every class I'd said it except today. And you told me you don't like summaries. So now, and the bottom line is chapters and chapters. Rotzon is an example for Eira Seviv, and faculty is an example for Eira Mamala. But the point I'm making here is like this. So really, you have to remember it's all one Keser. It's one.
Nothing about Solveig and Orma. I missed the point. You just said something.
It's chapters upon chapters here.
You said something about something's more Mamala.
Rotzon and Keiches Pnimim, the desire and the inner faculties, the immanent faculties, are an example for Makif and Pnimi. This is the Rebbe Rashab, the whole chapters on this. So anyway, what I was saying here is that you see them as one unconscious force, meaning the soul's unconscious power to do something, to get something. And you break it down, it's tainug and rotzon. But in general, one reflects the state of being that you are, and the other one reflects the being drawn to it. Desire is generally the being drawn to it. The question is, which is the root of which? That's discussed, and if you want, I've written about it plenty. Okay. Chapter Samachay. There's another desire before the desire that we just called it. Before he said the two desires have two names: rotzon hanelam, rotzon hagali, or koyach harotzon v'rotzon. So one is a hidden desire and a revealed one. One is the power of desire and desire. So now he's going to the hidden desire or the power of desire. That's the parenthesis. So we're talking now, as I said, a step before. Is everybody clear what I've said so far? Remember, the reason it's very difficult to understand this or to relate to it is because we don't know ourselves on that level. We know ourselves on the conscious level once we're already pursuing something. It's hard to see yourself, what's going on. Just like we spoke about Chochmah. Remember Chochmah, you already relate to the spark of the idea once you're conscious of it. But the moment the spark came to you and where it came from is something we can't speak about. So we're told about it. Because it's like behind a closed door that dropped in a machshava, a thought, a Chochmah. The same thing is with rotzon. We know when we want something, we know we want it. But what brought that wanting, and what are the stages that led to that? Science today talks about, neurologists talk about the neurons that charge and how they get charged and what stimulates them. Well, this is Chassidus doing it in a different way. And remember, Chassidus goes one step that they don't go to. Chassidus goes to the step called the God particle. Everything begins from the Atem. The Atem is beyond expression. Now the Atem wants expression, and that is the beginning of the process that will ultimately become something that we will be consciously aware of. So the Rebbe Rashab is taking us for a trip into the place where the conscious emerges from the unconscious, if you want to put it that way. So we talked about rotzon golei. It's a rotzon that has a kavana, but not necessarily a reason. No reason. Now he's going to rotzon hanelam, the hidden rotzon, and the koyach harotzon. Its relationship with desire and tainug, he doesn't say right now. I don't want to speculate. I have some thoughts, but let's first see what he says about desire. You just have to be patient. Let's learn like little children what he says here. Here you don't yet have that the soul is being drawn to any particular thing. Hatia, in a form of inclination, v'hamshacha mamish, lishtekik eleh, an actual being drawn to lishtekik, to strongly lust or desire for it. Because before we said rotzon golei, the revealed rotzon, or what he called actual rotzon, there's an actual inclination, you're drawn to it, you desire it. Here, you don't yet have it. So what do you have? And again, we're not going to be able to identify this in ourselves, because this is somewhat on the border between conscious and unconscious. So I would say you can touch this if you listen closely, but it's going to be hard for you to put your hand on it to say, okay, here's where it happens when it happens. So what is going on in this rotzon? It was determined and decided, huskum, like haskoma. He's going to call this haskoma. By his essence, that it's appropriate and befitting to desire that particular thing. That it's, and that it sheyavi to come into action. It's that it's fitting and appropriate for that thing to desire that thing, that it should come into being. So think of it like, if I'm going to read on, but let me just say my initial reaction to this would be: the second before you desire and work out in your mind a home that you want, your dream home, we already have, I want a home with these rooms and so on. That's a desire. It's not yet being built, but it's a desire. The second before that would be, what awakens a desire to have a home? It would be, I want to have a place to rest my soul. I want to have a place that's shaped like me. I want shelter. I want the security. There, the hachlota has happened. You made a decision. There's a step before that too. You haven't even thought about that. Like you ask a 5-year-old child, a 10-year-old child, do you want to have a home one day? They won't even think like that. I mean, yeah, they may say, you have a home, I also like a home. But I mean, on their own, they're not going to come to it. But you get a little older, you come to a point where there's something in you that wants to have your own domain. But that's achlata in you, that this thing, this concept is good for you. So I'm just giving my own initial example of this, which is before the state of, okay, now the desire starts taking on shape and form. What is it going to look like? What kind of home? Where? Etc. And still, it's not broken down to details. It's still all encompassed in that desire. But let's see how if this fits what I just explained to what he says. You don't yet have a rotzon. You see, here's where will doesn't really work, because will doesn't sound like an inclination. Desire is a driving force. Here you don't yet have a will of amshacha and being drawn, that he longs for it. Rak heskem bilvad, just a heskem bilvad, like an agreement, a general resolution, you can say, a general heskem. You're looking for the mania?
Commitment.
You can say commitment, that it's worthy to desire this. It's like a desire for the desire, if you want to put it that way. And this heskem, this agreement, this resolution, and determination, maybe determination. That's after he's already awakened. Because if nothing is awakened, he wouldn't have this either. Just in case you think you got to figure it out. He says, It's not the rotzon hamuchlet. There's another rotzon hamuchlet, which means a desire, a determined desire, a type of that explained elsewhere. Shehu bli hiseidas klal. That is without any awakening at all. V'hu ma sheyesh be'etzem hanefesh l'tzenus muchlotim matzad ha'etzem. This sounds similar to what he said before by rotzon atzmi. This is another level. He's talking not this level. This is that be'etzem hanefesh, the etzem of the soul. There are, if you want, that's probably good working there. Fundamental desires, muchlotim. When you say rotzon hamuchlet, rotzon hamuchlet is an expression that means a desire that is like absolute muchlet. That is rotzon hamuchlet, a final type of desire, a firm that's rooted in the etzem, mitzad etzem. Shaloi meseder b'hem. There's no awakening in them. There's no, you don't get aroused by them. And it's possible nothing will ever awaken from there. Is the soul, because if it's a soul, it has its essential desires within it, the rotzon muchlotim, that don't get awakened, or may never even get awakened. They're desires that the person can live their entire life and you'll never even be aware or conscious of it. They're muchlotim, they're determined by the essence because of the essence. Like it says elsewhere. He's not discussing that here. What is he discussing here? This strong, firm desire that's being explained here, we're talking about something that emerges after you're aroused by the thing. And the person has by him a shakavataria, how do you say shakavataria? Weighing different thoughts back and forth. How would you translate shakavataria? Like an inner debate or inner discussion, dialogue. If it's worthy to desire this or not. And he determined within himself that it's worthy.
That's like in the conscious level,
yeah, I know I called it, but yeah, it's true. This is sounding more conscious, but let's see. I think there's elements of this are conscious, not conscious, Like an atzmus, for sure, this doesn't work this way, because what is God, we talk about God consulting with the angels and determining back and forth. But let's see how he goes here. I don't want to conclude till we read more of it. Yet, this is only a heskem. It's only like an agreement or a determination, and a resolution, bavad only. You cannot call this an actual desire. Yeah, practically speaking, this would be, if you speak about it in a very simple level, someone comes to you, offers you something, or you yourself start thinking about something, you go back and forth. Is it worthy or not worthy? And then you come to a general decision that it's worthy. And then tomorrow or the next day or even a minute later, becomes a real rotzon to it. It could be worthy and you're not doing it anyway. That's on a basic level how he explains it. Obviously, if you really think about it in the source, it's a little deeper than that, because that would be that's the way he's explaining it right now. But let's continue on. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. And it can extend several years till there to be an arousal in the will and in the desire and in a chukka and a strong yearning, longing for it. I would say chukka is longing. And nevertheless, when it ever does emerge, over time, the desire will come, and also the action that it affects. So nevertheless, in other words, even if it takes time, where did it all come from? Because at one point he was awakened, aroused. He was determined by him that it's worthy to desire this. And that's why this rotzon came. So bottom line, there can be a big space, a long span of time between this rotzon hanelam, the awakening that it's worthy, and when you actualize it. But when you do actualize the rotzon, when the rotzon starts becoming an actuality, an actual desire, it is rooted in that initial place. Actually,
but you were 10 years old, you could have thought about something, and then like when 20 you could act on it?
Yeah, something like that. Not just thought about it. We're talking about you determined that it's worthy for you to want this.
Pursuit.
Yeah, and then you do then pursue. Yeah.
Get married, I want to have an and then when it's appropriate, then you turn it on.
Yeah, let's see. There's a lot of ways to explain this. It's most important to see where he wants to take this. There's a lot of consequences from this and many different applications. Now let's see where the Rebbe Rashab is going, and then we'll analyze. Because, as I said before, to me, I was speaking more like almost on an unconscious level. Now, as Cheskel just pointed out, it's true. It appears more something seems like a simple process we all go through. The point where you're not sure you really want, you go back and forth, you just say yeah, and then at some point you begin to the rotzon takes on real that you're now yearning for it and longing for it. Here there's no real yet longing, it's just you made a determination within yourself that it's worthy. And then you can put it on the back burner, so to speak. So it's all rooted in that original awakening and arousal, but it could be that it'll take time. The heskem zen nikra machshava v'lo rotzon mamish. Now he goes further. This heskem, this determination, this resolution, this determination is called machshava. It's called thought. You can't call it actual desire. The rotzon is sinner. Rotzon is the same letters as the word sinner. Sinner means a channel. Right? Kumoy hat sinner. Like a channel, shu hamshacha. Just like a sinner. A sinner is when you create a canal, a pathway, from one place to another. Let's say to carry water or whatever it may be. A pipeline, right? So it's like a pipeline is shoham shacha that draws something, that transmits something. Same thing, rotzon is a transmitter. So rotzon, think of rotzon like a pipe, like a channel, like a canal, that carries, that is drawn to something, is drawn to something. Nafshe, that your nafshe is drawn to something that you want. Yeah. This means that it's inspilus. It's some form of excitement. There's some form of movement going on. That in the spirit and the soul he's excited about this thing. In other words, it's not a passive state.
It's moved by it.
It's moved and stimulated. It's like there's a stimulation going on. Aval heskem, however, the heskem, the determination we just discussed, ain't a rotzon b'yispilus adayin. It's not a desire that has any excitement to it, any stimulation, any real being drawn to it. Ki'im machshava, it's only a thought. V'husha huskem, and that thought is that has been determined, v'huchlot, and resolved. B'machshavte, in his mind, in his thought, liyas reitze, to desire this thing. V'u'ba'emik b'nefesh, and it's in the depths of the soul. Shemuvdil be'erech ma'adavar, that's separate. That's entirely separate and apart from the thing, the object that you desire. Liyas mispal mizeh. It's removed to the point that it's for it being affected by it. In other words, the rotzon that's already excited or stimulated is closer to it. This state is still a step apart. It's still detached, though it is the root of the desire that will be stimulated. So you see here he's already talking emek nefesh. I think I would distinguish, obviously, what you desire. If you desire, should I have this cupcake or should I not have this cupcake? And you say, you know what, conceptually it's a good idea, but you push it off for a while, and then the rotzon starts working on you, and you get excited about it. That's obviously superficial. But if you're talking about a desire, let's say, for godliness, or a desire for something bigger in life, love, building a home, and so on, obviously it touches a deeper part of us. So I think it's distinguished. It's not every stupid little desire we have is necessarily to go through all this whole process. It's not relevant as much. But I guess it really fits everywhere. Like
So when you're from a machshava of a higher level, just like somehow
that's why it's called machshava hagduma da'ak. That's what it's going to call it machshava.
So we're doing it in atzmos, sort of like a higher level within a deeper level within whatever that means. Within atzmos is a machshava from the previous level down to the level of what's in its kesser in the next level down. It's very interesting. It's hard to make an analogy from what we have down here, different levels in Atzmos. So this is a very big chiddush for me.
It's not Atzmos.
We'll be in Atzmos.
No, we're not.
It's not Atzmos.
No.
It's out of Atzmos, right?
Yeah, we talk about Atzmus is very rare in Chassidus. So when you talk about Atzmus, it's going to make you clear that it's Atzmus. He's talking here already. You're not talking about. I mean, everything is within Atzmus, if you wish. If you're practically, he's really talking about Ak here, Ak, and maybe Tehir law, and then the specific rotzon. Yeah. Now he's going. Now, this means that the rotzon hagoli, the revealed desire, which we spoke about in chapter 64, it's a level in the spirit that is close to the object or to the action. It could be either way. Yeah. And it's in a form of relationship with it. And that's why it's stimulated. It's excited. It's in a state of stimulation or excitement. But the resolution, the determination, and the concealed desire, this is in a level that is still separate and apart, detached. He's giving an example now. Example being, like for example, Valderech, like similar to Meichen Amidis, the intellect and emotions shall pitam v'das. The intellect and emotions that work, that are rational. That when a person sees something that is beloved, davar something he loves, umeiven besichle, and he understands with his intelligence shadavar tevle, that this thing is good for him. He gets stimulated. His love gets stimulated, excited, and drawn aladover to this thing, to this object, to this item. Now we see. We see at times, even when, while he understands that the thing is good for him, nevertheless he does not get excited and stimulated with a love toward it. Because the reason being, because he's distant and separate from the thing. Parentheses. There, in this case that he's discussing, it's because of hederis kashas, a lack of connection between the two. Like it says elsewhere. Nevertheless, however you interpret it, how do you b'chinas havdalah? He's in a state of separation, and therefore is not excited. You see, that's the distinction. Here, by the rotzon, the heskem, there is a kashas, meaning you determined and resolved to desire this thing. It's only that you're not yet excited by it. There, by Meichen Amidis, he's just qualifying. There, if you, for example, you can see something that you understand is good for you and still not get excited by it. He spoke about this before. How Meichen doesn't come yet into Midis. He's just giving an example. He wants to give an example how you could have two stages where you can understand and actually fall in love with it, and then be drawn to it lovingly. That's Meichen and Midis. On a higher level, he's talking now desire, which isn't Meichen and Midis. You're talking more on a desire level. We're saying that the same thing is possible. Same thing is with a hidden desire. It's in a high state in the soul, spirit. Separate from the action, from the objective. And therefore, though he's awakened and he's aroused for this thing, he's determined by in himself. He's not excited yet, not stimulated with it. To have an actual desire. It's only that it's worthy of desiring it. So that's this example. Now obviously, since he's using this example, let's make it clear that desire is not the emotion of love where you want something for, because he's not talking here. He's just using that as the Meichen and Midis is not the same thing as these two levels of rotzon. Now, how do we explain that? Because here we're not talking about, I would say, a few things. One distinction is Meichen and Midas is talking about after there's already a rotzon, and so on. So it's really talking about reality, like a real practical thing. You either see something, and you say, I like this, or your mind tells you it's good for you. You're talking about real, it's much more in actual faculties, whereas desire is more within your consciousness. You're imagining what you desire, what you don't desire. That's how I would distinguish. Because, it's awfully similar. You could just say, what do you mean? Moichen is like the rotzon, the first rotzon, and Midas is the second. But we're not talking about desire. Here we're talking, as I said, much more. What?
Both of these levels are within Machshavah.
Right, exactly. And they're more within the souls. Right. Yeah, but let's play it out. Let's say a person's let's use an example. I don't want to use a grub example. Let's use a subtle example.
It's good for him to want to learn Torah. I mean, you can make it on a very nice something that's easy.
Yeah, but let's take that, right, exactly. Let's say you go to a class, you like this class, you enjoy the class. Where's the rotzon? Where's the moichen? Where's the midas? That's the question. Okay. So the distinction I would make is rotzon is a initiator and a generator of creating realities. Moichen and midas are tools to work within a reality. You understand what I mean? I'll explain what I mean. In your mind, you could say, sitting on your own, I want to learn Ayin Beis. I want to learn Chassidus. That's not playing itself out in reality. That's in your own spirit. You determine, okay, and now you go and start looking for a class. And then whatever. Then you like this class, you don't like this one, you go to another one. Moichen and Midas is already how it plays itself out in the arena of actions. It's not in the arena of your inner desires or not. So it can go both ways. You can walk down the street and see something you like in a candy store, and suddenly your taiva likes it. That will obviously awaken in a desire, but it's not a desire that's coming from any depths of your soul. It's a momentary. That's where we have to distinguish it. Yeah. It's a whole different story if that's why I say initiate. We're talking about rotzon. We're talking about a rotzon for a bias, a rotzon to create existence.
It's confusing because he mentioned the spouse in terms of rotzon, but it's really the hamshacha after rotzon is.
Right, exactly. I just want to distinguish. I wanted to distinguish simply because we live so much on the moichen midas level, on actual senses. We don't really think about where it all began from. Like. An analyst will say, why is it when you see a candy store, suddenly your eyes are drawn and so on? Because in your soul, there's something that you identify with sweets. I don't know, it arouses some serotonin in your brain and creates a high. So the thing is, and the reason I'm pointing it out because I want to ground this. How we function, we don't function on this level. We don't think about rotzon too much. We think, that's why I called rotzon before unconscious. Obviously, there's a process of how you ashakavitaya back and forth. We function primarily on a functional level. We function very biologically, basically. Rotzon, remember, if you talk about biological means survival. What do we do most of the day? We're busy with survival. We're busy with our needs, and then we go a little into that's nefesh. A little ruach is an emotional life. A neshama is a moichen life. Chaya is rotzon. Just if you want to put in the levels of the soul. How many of us think about the roots of our desires, where they come from?
All the day.
No, fine. If you think about it in that way, by all means. By the way, listen, spiritual living and spiritual thinking means you're not thinking about my needs right now. You're thinking about the purpose. Why am I here? Look, Mashiach is the same question as why are we here, and will this purpose and realizing the purpose of our existence. That's in simple English, Mashiach. At the end of the day. The purpose of all of existence. Why it was all put here in the first place. Those that think about that a lot are going to think about Mashiach because they're going to think, what this destination. But my point that I just simply wanted to qualify because you don't want to schlep rotzon. He's talking here into our simple day-to-day, pedestrian activities. That's all I meant here. That's all I was saying here. But the example is a good example. So the example is this, except with the qualification in the parentheses, that there's a lack of iskashas. The reason that you see it's good for you and you have no relationship with it, and you're not drawn to it because there's no connection. Here there is a connection. But it still works as an example to tell you how that you can have two stages. So first you have the rotzon elam. It's separate. So it's worthy to desire, but you don't yet have the full, let's call it investment of the desire being drawn to it and all that comes with that. Yeah, that would be the big difference. I would say before, if you remember, he spoke about the difference in midas and rotzon. Because you can see, rotzon again has words he's using, hishtekakus, hispilus. These are words we use for midas. So I would say the following. First of all, it says in Kabbalah Chassidus that midas are rooted in rotzon. Because rotzon is a tzinner, which means it runs towards something, is drawn to something. That's where the spilus of midas come from, the excitement that they're drawn. The difference is obvious, is in several levels. Rotzon is a makif, and midas are pnimim. Midas, as I said, are conscious, defined emotions and feelings. The rotzon, even the second rotzon, the lower level, there is already an excitement. It's not an emotional excitement. You're talking about the rotzon now, in your mind, is drawn to it. That will awaken a midah, and then you really get into action. But it's not yet even in that place. So even the second level of rotzon is not midas yet. Another thing he said, if you recall earlier, he said that midas are defined by seichel. You think about it, and then you determine this is good for me. Where we talk about, let's say, the love for a child, he called that not midas, he calls that rotzon. Because it's a rotzon atzmi. That's like, you're drawn to your child is not a midas dika thing. It manifests in midas, but it's rooted in your connection with your child that's higher than emotions. That's why you're not always. Whereas, for example, let's say an object that you desire, there it comes into an actual feeling for it. That's when you have a feeling. You don't have a feeling, it can be, So desire brings it to feelings, but it's not the same. Okay. What time is it now?
10 to 10.
The example I've been thinking about while you've gone over this whole thing is like a political platform. Like, when the new Vada Kahal comes into being, they have a whole platform of 100 things that they like to do, a laundry. Things that are proper to do, good to do.
Okay, that's good. I like that.
The Democratic National Committee. Right now, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have the National Convention. So they have, if you ever looked at their Democratic National Committee platform, it's 400, 500 pages, 600 pages. Not all of it, these are things that are proper, good, but they're not yet into. Then there's actionable ones. There's 10 chosen that they're going to actually work on, which is.
Well, I'm skeptical. Does anything come into action at all? That's another story. But at least that's a third madrega that Ayin Beis doesn't talk about. Promises, unkept promises. I got you loud and clear. It's very good. Yes, it's a good example where it's worthy to do and worthy to desire and wish. But it's yeah. That's fine. That's good.
Did you have any of those, Dr. Lang, when you were on the pod?
We published that.
You had a long laundry list of things that were proper to do for the community.
At least we had something.
V'nimtza, let's continue here. V'nimtza hefresh ben heskem l'rotzon hu. So from the nimtza, we find from this to conclude the difference between heskem, the resolution. We said I like determination, to be honest. Here I think determination is the right word, but l'rotzon to actual desire. The difference is sharotzon hu amshach hasan nefesh miyesei medes batzmusa. Desire is the amshach of the transmission or being drawn. The soul's being drawn to something from a state where it stands batzmusa within its own essence. Shahisim ufshetis mishum davar, where it was completely abstract and separate from, beyond everything. Are you looking for the mania thing?
Yes.
I'll find it in a minute if you want. It's on the left side of the page, 1/3 of the way up.
Wow.
Since you're looking, I see you're going crazy about it, I'll tell you exactly where it is.
Look at that side of the page.
It's page 91, chapter 51.
I thought it was earlier that time.
Gidu b'cheli manya. Okay. So here's the difference, right? So there's a state where you're just in yourself, within yourself, separate from everything. Think of it in a state,
It's theoretical. So it's something that's good in theory.
One second. One second. One second. So this level is that you're already being drawn away from the way you stand on your own. A person is all the way. He's explaining the whole picture now. An individual can be batzmusa. That means when you are completely on your own, you don't need anything. You're separate from everything. Now comes a rotzon that you should be drawn lemuchus hadavar, lemuchus v'davar zulasa, to something that is from the identity and essence, something outside of the soul, k'shurei tzibah. When he desires it. Mashenkin by heskem shehan, however, in contrast, a heskem, this determination, shanefesh maskemis, that the soul agrees or resolves, agrees, shadoi lirtzes bedavar pleni, that it's worthy to desire a certain item, a certain thing. Adayin ein muhus nimshachas le'sedavar klal. His muhus, the person's soul's muhus, his essence, is not drawn yet to this thing at all. Rakshu b'chinas haskama. What? Do you have such a desire is the question.
Well, pretty good.
Huh?
Having a desire is pretty good.
Rakshu b'chinas haskama batzmusa. It's only an agreement, a resolution, or a determination in the essence, which will be a source and a root for the desire that will come afterwards in the span of time, as time passes. Nevertheless, with all this being said, it's still a yerida, it's still a descent compared to the essence of the soul, as it is before, prior to even having this resolution or determination. Because that essence of the soul is mufshatis, is completely abstract, detached, and negates anything outside of itself. It's not even a source for the transmission or for the being drawn to v'hatia and the inclination to anything outside of herself. By contrast, the heskem, even the resolution and determination, is already heirodus hamahus. The mahus already is descending lias mehaschaber luzalasa, to begin to connect to something outside of herself. However, it's not like the descent of the essence that comes through the second level desire, because that's an actual inclination and being drawn literally to that object. However, in the heskem, in the resolution, the determination, where he did not yet extend himself to desire, it's only a resolution within his essence, that he will be drawn and to desire afterwards. One second.
It could come out later to want it. It doesn't mean that his heskem is to want it later.
Fine. Okay, but like he said before, it may not even come out at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah. That's the mukhlat. No, I'm sorry. Right. That will. Right. He adds here that later will come. It'll be drawn. It'll extend to actually wanting it. So this now is an interface. This higher level, the heskem, is an interface, a mamutza, an intermediary, between the etzem of the nefesh, the rotzon gole. See, there's where you see the real unconscious power of it. It's an interface between the etzem and nefesh that's completely removed to the actual being drawn to amshachas hanefesh, the drawer. V'hari hanefesh atzmo muvdela shemishlat l'slagami mekol davar. Because I'm sorry. Because as we explained earlier, the Pedic Mem Test, chapter 49, that the rotzon is not a power, a faculty of its own. Remember, it's like the oir, not like shefa. All it is the inclination and the extension and the drawing of the soul outward. All it is, that's all it is. It's the agent of the soul's expression. Yeah. So, but nevertheless, and the soul itself, the spirit itself, is separate from and negates completely anything outside of itself. In order for there to be a rotzon goli, a conscious, revealed desire, to be drawn to anything, that's through the intermediary interface of this determination. That's still in the essence. It's only a bringing it down one level. This is the interface to bring rotzon goli. So basically, what he's saying here, which he's going to, I'm sure, going to bring it out in the next chapter. This is all the mashal, is that atzmus is removed from everything. That where he envisioned and already desired a world and is drawn to it, is rotzon ha-goli. Rotzon. Then there's a mamutza. In the oir, there's a level of oir that is just determined, this is the right thing to do.
Rotzon muchlat.
He doesn't call that muchlat. He says, and rotzon muchlat, but not the muchlat. Not the muchlat. It's a rotzon muchlat. It's a heskem. It's basically oir. What he's going to call it is going to be the oir that's before the aleis harotzon, before he actually desired in a very defined way. So there's two makifim. Right here you have two makifim. The rotzon goli and the rotzon the heskem above the rotzon goli.
Isn't that the level before the tanya, the level that it doesn't create?
I don't know.
He has a desire.
I'm not sure. I thought about it. I'm not sure. I want to see what he says. The next chapter is going to clarify that.
So this is the resource part. This is the monkey.
So this is. He didn't spell out where these makifim are yet, but clearly he's going to connect it to Ak and Tiri Law and so on. The point being, if you recall earlier, a big point was the interfaces that there's two forces. One represents God. Is an agent of God, like the examples he gave of the sun, of the nefesh. Rotzon is another example. The desire desire is not a faculty. All it is the spirit wanting something. It's an agent. It's an extension of it's expression of the soul. That's all it is. Remember, I talked about that servant that comes and tells you, there's a king in the world, or it doesn't really matter the details. Then there's someone that comes. Then there's a whose focus is the object, which is we want a world now. We want Atem tzemeach chai medaber. We want Atzilas bria. They're both coming from God. They're both but one has a particular mission, and one is simply just an expression of God's will. So he explained that's the difference between and shefa. That's the difference between rotzon and keiches. That was discussed at length. Now he's breaking it further and explaining that in that itself, there's the where it's a desire for something, so it's already connected somewhat to it, and then there's the desire, just the heskem, which is a mamutza, that at least he's gone a step beyond the etzem. The etzem has now began to the word I wanted to say, began to when you say someone's asleep and it begins to you start seeing you begin the murmurings of existence begin, so to speak. And then that will manifest in a rotzon, actual rotzon. Yeah. Kitzur.
We're going to allow ourselves to crave something.
A summary. Before the actual conscious or the revealed desire is the determination. They is stimulated in something or awakened in something, and determines that it's something that should be desired.
This is
appropriate.
What caused him to be decided with them? That is the level letting go.
Well, it's going to end up being in Atzmos. It's in Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu, from within. But it could have been that he just has a says and then creates. He wants a stepping stones. He wants to have an order in this. So, right. So, of course, God could just desire and then create. But we need a struggle, right? But you don't yet have an inclination that is stimulated, a stimulated inclination or excitable inclination. Only that through this you'll come to a desire of that nature. That's why it's called only thought. Because it's in its essence separate from and apart. Not like the lower level, the desire is a revealed a revelation of Amshach and being drawn to the object that he desires. Nevertheless, it's still a yerida. Even the higher level is a descent from the essence, literally, Valkenu B'chinas Mumutza. That's why it's an interface between Etzem L'Anefesh for rotzon Hagoli, between the essence of the soul and the rotzon Hagoli. Let's put it this way: as doctors, soul doctors, the key to any good doctor is that you identify the exact problem. You don't just solve it in general. By dissecting this, you can identify exactly where you want to get the connection, where is lacking a connection. Is it in the rotzon Goli? Is it in the rotzon this? Is it here? So it's really giving us an unbelievable map.
Line, it says machshava, ki basmusi yadayim movement madav. So is it machshava or is it atzmusi?
It's both.
Maybe it's atzmusi and the machshava, right?
No, it says Herodes Hamuchus. Machshava is lower than the Atzmus.
It's low, you're right.
Of course, so it's a given.
But then, right, so nobody's saying that ki basmusi yadayim movement madav.
Yeah.
He said, explained it. Because it's still not. It's a lower level from the Atzmus that's not yet Machshava.
It doesn't mean the atzmus.
We're not talking about Atzmus in Tanna. We're talking about Atzmus altogether. We're talking about a person is for himself. Then there's the heskem. Then there's the rotzon. 3 steps. 3 steps.
So there's no contemplation by the Eibishter within Atzmos?
That's very much.
Not here. Not in this chapter. There's places for that. Okay, so we did chapter 65, page 121 through 120, top of 123.